leader, founder, hero, author, work rules, insights from inside Google that will transform how you live and lead. Laszlo Bock.
Man, whoa, that's loud. That is a tough act to follow. I want you to just clear all that from your mind. Go to the event, but reduce the bar you have for my presentation, please. How long have you all been sitting here? About a little over an hour, hour and a half? Okay. I got bad news for you. And the timer down here is giving me half the time I thought I had, so I'm going to ignore that and hope it's going up. Okay, good, I've got 90 minutes. So everything I'm going to share with you today is backed by research and science. One of the hard things about talking about people issues is we're all people, we've all managed people, we all have opinions. Most of our opinions about how to manage people are wrong. We all think we can hire great people. By definition, we hire average people. We all think we're unbiased. By definition, we all carry biases. So I'm going to start, though, with some science that says the human mind generally can really fully focus for about 90 minutes before people just get mentally fatigued. So I'm going to sacrifice a minute or two of precious time and ask everyone to stand up. Quickly. Just stand up, stretch a little bit, flex, reach for the sky. Put your wallets and purses under the tape. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, back down. You've had enough. Thank you. So in theory, you should be a little more attentive and ready to go. My name's Laszlo Bock. I have been incredibly lucky in my life. I was born in communist Romania, came to the United States as a refugee when I was young. My mom had been an English teacher, so speaking to this group is particularly important to me. My first job was actually working as a teacher. And then later, I taught English abroad a little bit. I worked as a tutor. Then I had a bunch of other jobs, including leading what we called people operations at Google for about a decade. I since left. I started a company called Humu, where our mission is to make work better for everyone, everywhere. And we use that by using machine learning-powered nudges, tiny little interventions that have a dramatic impact on behavior. And I'll talk about that in the context of education a little bit later. While I was at Google, Larry Page was kind enough to allow me to write a book about how to make work better, where we took some of what Google did, but also the best science and case studies from around the world to really synthesize how do you build great organizations that perform incredibly well, that do good for people. The only reason I mention it is I donate all the money to charity. There's a fantastic organization called Peninsula Bridge, for example, up near San Francisco. They work with grades 6 through 12 kids, basically poor, underprivileged kids. The only criteria to participate is you have to have one supportive adult in your life. They have a 100% high school graduation rate and a 100% college graduation rate. And it's thanks to this that I'm able to support things like that. So, 3 people were excited about that. So in the book, there's a bunch of principles about how to make work better. And again, they're all rooted in science. They work, they scale. For this audience, I'm going to focus on 3 of them. The importance of giving work meaning, and why that's harder than it looks, and why it's more important than it sounds. The importance of being both frugal and generous, because even at a place like Google, you'll be shocked to learn there wasn't always infinite money, certainly not for my team. And in the real world, the startup world, there's no money. And I know in education, you're not exactly rolling in the dough either. And the third is the importance of nudging. Tiny little interventions that have a profound impact on human behavior. And I'm going to try to connect all these to the world of education. I know people here come from, there's startups, there's university administrators, there's people in the people field, all kinds of different backgrounds. I'll try to hit on as many as I can and try to make this useful. Amy Rosinski is a professor at Yale University. She happens to be a friend of mine, and she does work on giving people meaning in their jobs. And one of the things she's found in her research is that only about 1/3 of people find their work to be meaningful. And that's true regardless of the profession. So you may not be surprised to learn that only 1/3 of lawyers find their work personally meaningful and fulfilling. But it's also true of teachers. It's also true of doctors and nurses. It's also true of people who work in the clergy. I had a friend who's a minister. I said, this cannot be true. This is like, clergy, that must be the most mission-driven thing in the world. You're saving souls of all things. And he said, no, actually, it's very true. I've seen it, because it's too easy to remember the duty but forget the joy. So it's easy to lose sight of meaning and mission. So Amy, in fact, found that about a third of people find meaning in their work. A third of people find it as a means to an end. I got to make a buck. And a third think of it as a game to be won. I got to climb the ladder. I got to win. I got to compete. I got to get to the next level. Amy went and did research at Yale New Haven Hospital and a number of other hospitals to understand if meaning actually mattered. And she spent time with the janitorial staff. And the janitorial staff, largely uneducated, maybe a high school education at best, largely female workforce, almost entirely black workforce. And what she found was she went into a coma ward, and there were janitors in that coma ward, women who were moving things around the rooms. They would take a painting from one room, take it down and carry it and put it in another room. And when she said to these women, "What are you doing?" they said, "Well, I feel like my job is more than just cleaning. I feel like I'm helping them recover by caring for them. So I figure by moving things around, they're going to feel better, they're going to recover more quickly." Amy said, "You get fired for that. Your job is to change bedpans, not to change paintings." And this woman she was talking to said, "It doesn't matter. There's something more important here, and I'm helping these people." So drawing that connection to meaning is important, but I don't want to just give you stories. Adam Grant is a professor at Wharton, and he's fantastic. And his thesis, his PhD thesis, was on, does meaning have a business impact in organizations? So this is data from an organization that raises scholarship money for colleges. So some of your institutions may use these. It's a third party. You give them the alumni database. You give them likelihood of giving, and they just dial for dollars. And in this call center, when Adam started working with them, the average person was raising $1,300 per week. By the end of working with them, the average person was raising more than $5,000 per week. And the way he did that was by connecting people to meaning in their work. He thought, let me get stories from graduates and have those stories get told to the people working in the call center. And the stories had no impact at all. Because I went to a great college, I learned a lot, I made lifelong friends. Didn't impact performance. He had them collect a second set of stories. Tell me what this meant to you. And so he got an essay back that said, thanks to this scholarship, I was exposed to the complete works of William Shakespeare for the first time. And as a result of that, not only did I gain a deeper understanding of the human language, but I realized what I'm living and experiencing today is the same thing that people experienced 500 years ago. I'm part of something bigger than myself. And that was Group C. Those people who were exposed to those kinds of essays saw meaning in their work. Raised $3,000 a week. And then he had the students come in for 5 minutes once a month and tell their stories. More than $5,000 were raised. And he replicated this study again and again. On average, connecting people to meaning in their work makes them 21% more productive. So the simple trick, the way to do this in your organizations, because remember, only a third of people find meaning in their work on average, is to, number one, go to the people who seem really fired up, who talk about why they're doing this, and ask them and have them tell their stories. Number two, go to the beneficiaries of your work and have them tell stories about what it personally meant to them. Didn't give them a better job or career. That's table stakes. It changed how they viewed the world. Those are the stories you want to tell. Second broad thing I want to talk about is the importance of being both frugal and generous. So Google's a rich company. When I started, Google had 30% net profit margins. I think it's dropped since then, but this was a company with a ton of money to spend. My department, people operations, did not have a lot of money to spend. I remember one time Larry came and he said, we should do stuff with maker fairs, because Larry's kids were getting to that age where he was taking interest. So I went and kind of looked at my budget and came back and said, Larry, to do this right, to do it really well, I need $300,000 so I can cut back from these programs that we're doing for our employees. Scrape together $300,000, we'll do this amazing stuff. Larry didn't think that was a good idea. He wasn't impressed. He went to the head of engineering. The head of engineering asked a guy, a friend of mine, Chris DeBona, who was in engineering, hey, Chris, put together a plan for makers fairs. Chris came back. He said, well, I need $7 million. Head of engineering said, no problem. And so Google spent $7 million on maker fairs that year, right? So even in companies and organizations that have a tremendous amount of money, it's not evenly distributed. It's kind of like the real world. And now that I live in the real world, at a startup that's venture funded, that loses money every single month, there's certainly not infinite money. So the key principle is, if you are resource constrained, you need to find times when you can be generous to people. And it's incredibly difficult to do. But the two times to do it are when things are really good and when things are really bad. You celebrate the good, and that's a time to be generous, and you care for those around you when things are really bad. So a couple examples. Google, while I was there, we created a benefit for when you die. If you're an employee at Google and you die, all your stock vests, but your surviving spouse or significant other gets half your salary for 10 years. And if you have kids, they get $1,000 a month until they turn either 18 or 24, depending on whether or not they go to college. And the reason we put that in place was because when the company was small, we kind of knew everybody, and sadly, once in a while, awful things happen, and someone would pass away, and we would say, like, okay, let's fix it, let's write a check to the family. Maybe fix it isn't the right word. Let's do what we can to help. So we write a check to the family for $100,000, $500,000, $1 million. Then we got bigger, and what I realized was I was still seeing all this, but the leadership team wasn't, because they didn't know everybody anymore. So we put this policy in place. We didn't tell anybody. It was only an as-needed policy. And the reason we didn't tell anybody is it's not like it's a recruiting tool, right? You're not going to go on college campuses and say, we've got this benefit, you're going to love it. But I was talking to a journalist, and I let it slip 2.5 years after we put it in place, and employees finally found out that we had been doing this for 2.5 years. And I got a letter from an employee who had cancer, and the cancer was in remission. And every 6 months, this employee had to go get an MRI to make sure the cancer was still gone. And in his letter, he wrote, every 6 months I have a test. And every 6 months while I'm lying here being tested, I compose a letter to Larry Page, the founder of Google, in my head saying, please, if the cancer comes back, take care of my family. Last week, I had another test, and I came back clean. And I didn't write a letter in my head. That's a generous thing you can do for people. And it actually doesn't cost that much money. Because at first we would just make the payments, then you get an insurance policy, and thank goodness most people don't have the tragedy of passing away during their working years. Most people live long, healthy lives. So it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, you're there for people. At my company now, at Humu, and again, small venture-funded company, but this is just to illustrate what you can do when you're small. We were inspired by something that happens in Latino communities called a cunita. And a cunita, and I don't know the exact translation, but it's a money pool. Everyone sort of gets together, they donate money. If somebody needs it, they get that money that year, and then the next year everyone donates again. The IRS has a table that says you're legally allowed to make loans to anybody you want, at usually around a 1 or 2% interest rate. So there's no employee tax consequence. It's a legitimate loan. We created something we call the You Are Not Alone loan program. So it's a revolving loan fund, some amount of money that we've set aside where if employees need it for whatever purpose, they can draw on that at a 2% interest rate rather than having to pay, a 25% credit card rate or a bank loan rate. And it makes a real difference in people's lives. So there's opportunities to be generous even when you're small, even when you don't have a lot of resource. I'll give you a couple education examples. I promise this is not pandering. I thought this was awesome long before I knew I was coming here. Starbucks program with ASU about paying tuition for their employees. I think it's brilliant. It's not that expensive. They didn't partner with Harvard or some incredibly high-priced school. They partnered with a place where there's going to be tremendous value for that education, where there's history of results of people going on and bettering themselves. Absolutely brilliant. Not that expensive. Not that far from here, in Santa Clarita, just a little north of Los Angeles, there's a junior high school called La Mesa Junior High School. And the principal, Michelle Colbert-Krantz, does all the things the best principals in the world do, right? At the beginning of school, she's standing outside, shaking hands with each student and calling them by name when they come in. For her staff, she sends out handwritten birthday cards and anniversary cards to celebrate how long they've been at the company or at the school. But the thing she does that really I thought was really clever was she gives out kudos bars to people. So she walks around campus and into her meetings and into classrooms, and she carries a bunch of candy bars, kudos bars. And if somebody has done something well, she gives them a kudos. And it's the sweetest, most thoughtful thing in the world. It costs next to nothing. And it's sweet and thoughtful not just because you're recognizing something in the moment, but because you're giving somebody a memento of that. So I learned about that. I told people at my old job about it while I was there. And when I left, somebody gave me a strong and kind bar, right? There's kind bars, and then there's like the spicy ones or flavorful or whatever. And 3 years later, I still have it. It's on my office, sitting on my shelf, because it tells me that I meant something to that person. So you don't have to spend a ton of money, but you want to be generous when times are good, and particularly generous when times are bad. The third and final thing I want to talk about are nudges. The term nudge was coined by Dick Thaler, who's a professor at the University of Chicago and actually won the Nobel Prize in economics last year for his work on this, and by Cass Sunstein, who's a professor at Harvard Law School, who, even though he did half the work, also did not win the Nobel Prize somehow. So it doesn't feel quite fair. They're both friends. It doesn't seem to be a source of friction. But a nudge is a small intervention that makes it easier to make a good decision. It doesn't remove choice. It doesn't force you to do anything. It just makes it easier to do the right thing. So a couple examples. Do any of your organizations hire people ever? Anybody hire people? Okay, a few. One. Terrific. At Google, we hired people all the time. We'd hire 10 to 15,000 people a year out of 3 million resumes a year. And on average, it took people 9 months to become fully productive. And one day, with the team, I was wondering, can we make that faster? So we studied all the people who get productive faster than that, because there's a distribution, right? And you see this in your organization. Some people show up, hit the ground running. Some people take 3, 6, 9, 12 months to fully get it. Some people, in fact, get productive faster. And it turns out there's 5 things they do that drive that faster time to productivity. And they're kind of super obvious, simple things that not everyone does. So they form 2 social connections in the first week. They start to build a network. They get a computer that works. One of the 5 most important things. Because it turns out there's something special about that first week in a job. What happens in that first week is you're imprinting. You're like a baby bird coming out of an eggshell. You're like trying to understand the norms, trying to understand what's going on. If you're fighting with IT or trying to get a computer to work, you're not paying attention to that, and it actually degrades your performance over time. And that effect can persist for 18 or 24 or even 36 months. Third thing they do, and this one's a little counterintuitive, they ask for feedback. And that one's a little weird, because when you start a job, you want to show how awesome you are. You want to show that you earned the job, you deserved it. Some people, though, on Wednesday of that first week, go to their boss and say, is this going okay? What can I do differently? And by building in that learning loop early on, they actually continue learning and course correct earlier. So long story short, 9 months to get fully productive on average, and we created a nudge. We would send an email. I don't know if they still do this, but while I was there, on Monday morning, if you're a new hire, you get an email that says, do these 5 things. Make sure your laptop works. Make sure you meet 2 people, et cetera, et cetera. That's one email. The Friday before a new employee starts, their manager gets another email that says, make sure your person does these 5 things. You're nudging both sides because you want the behavior to change. And not everyone opens the email, and not everyone reads it. And rarely do both sides of the equation both actually take action on it. But the time to full productivity dropped from 9 months to 6 months. It's pretty good. 3-month improvement. When you measure it across an employee's life cycle at Google, that's a 2% improvement in productivity. Doesn't sound like a lot, but for every 50 people you hire, that means you're getting 1 free person. For Google, at the time Google had, $20 billion in net income. That means $400 million a year in extra income. Suddenly, we can fund maker fairs. Finally. I'll give you another example. This is what we've seen at Humu since we started. This is data from a call center. And the outcome metric was first call resolution rate. Like when somebody calls and asks for help, does their issue get resolved? And the range of performance was really tight. It was 85 to 99% of the time, things got resolved the first time for every person in that call center, right? So we're a call center. Everyone here is performing 85 to 99% of the time. First time a call comes in, we resolve it. The reason the low end is 85% is because if you're under 85% first call resolution rate, what happens to you? You get fired. That's how call centers work. And what we found was there were different levels of happiness among different people performing. The top performers were happier than the poor performers. Does that surprise anybody? It shouldn't, because top performers live in a completely different organization. They get different opportunities offered to them. They walk on water. Everybody likes them. Everyone wants to be around them. So if you're a poor performer, whether it's your fault or not, you got to dig your way out of this pit. So we did a bunch of analytics, and what we found was there was a behavioral difference between the top and bottom performers that was driving this change, this difference in happiness. Because the bottom performers were at about an 87% first call resolution rate, the top performers 99%. The behavioral difference was this. In a call center, your time is very tightly measured. There's time spent on the phone, there's time researching, there's legally required breaks, there's time documenting. Right? I just did the call, I had to go offline to talk to a manager, I came back, I resolved it, now I have to write down what happened. That's your time. And then there's this weird thing called unaccounted for time, which is just time that slips through the cracks, that's not exactly captured. The very best performers had 1.5 minutes of unaccounted for time a day. The very worst performers had 30 seconds. Because the very best performers, management left them alone a little bit more. Laszlo's goofing off for him. It's fine. He's hitting his numbers. At the other extreme, Laszlo, what are you doing? Get back on the phone. And what's crazy is that incremental 60 seconds, it's not like they had a 1-minute break at 12:01. It's not like the break we had where everyone stood up, right? It was little micro breaks spread throughout the day. Type, 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 answer phone, type, type, type. Okay. Type, 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 answer the phone. That was it. So we send nudges. Make sure you take a break every now and then. If you feel stressed, push back from your keyboard for a second. It's okay to take 20 seconds to clear your head. And we saw the performance difference virtually completely go away. That's the power of a nudge. A small intervention can have a massive, massive difference on performance. So let's come back to the academic environment. Remember Ben Franklin had his 13 values, right? He wrote about this when he was 20. He wrote about 13 things that he thought were important. There were things like, I don't remember the exact language because it was a long time ago for me, but when I learned about it, but it was things like, temperance, basically don't eat till you're full, don't drink till you're tipsy. There was something about the use of language and sort of like not speaking too much and only saying things that are actually useful to the people around you in that conversation. So he had 13 things he wanted to work on. And every month he had one thing and he would work on that value. What does this have to do with education? I've been incredibly blessed and lucky. And I have 3 daughters. And the youngest is in 4th grade, but the other 2 are either in or have been through middle school. And we elected to send them, I was a product of public schools the whole way, but we elected to send them to a girls' school for middle school. Because the research is middle school is when girls start pulling back in math and science, right? Social dynamic changes. They're told to be pretty instead of smart. And teachers stop calling on them as much. They don't raise their hands as much. So I go to the open house one night for the middle school, and it's an all-girls school. And it's the biology teacher, and she has an aquarium on her desk at the front of the classroom, and she has a lemon and a lime. And she asks the parents, the dads and moms in the room, I'm going to put these in the water, what's going to happen? Will they float? Will they sink? What's going to happen? All the dads raise their hands. All the men have opinions. The moms did not. And we know from the research that boys are more likely to raise their hands and more likely to speak up sooner than girls. Girls are more likely to wait until they're certain and therefore more likely to get the answer correct than boys. But boys raising their hands creates a positive feedback loop for a teacher. He must be engaged. Look at him raising his hand. I'm going to call on him. And even if it's wrong, I get some interaction. Without realizing there's a positive feedback loop created, that kid gets called on more, the girls get called on less. At this girls' school, who do you think the teacher called on? All the dads. All the dads. And it made me realize, even in that environment where they should know better, they have the same subtle biases, they make the same errors. So, what does that have to do with nudges and with Ben Franklin and with the schools? A very simple nudge. Every single month, figure out one thing that teachers should work on. Teachers are busy. My mom was one. It's an incredibly difficult job. It can be an incredibly lonely job. And it's hard because you don't actually know the results of what you're doing. I mean, you see it in the classroom, but it's going to be 10 or 15 years before these kids grow up and find their paths in the world, right? So the feedback, it's not like somebody clicking on an ad. If somebody searches for Nike and they click on the Nike ad at the top, you know it worked. Kids aren't like that. So very simple nudge. Give a handout in the month of January to every teacher and say, try to call on the girls. That's it. Just raise awareness a little bit. And I don't know enough about teaching to prescribe that as the specific thing, and then each month have a different handout, just try one thing. But I will tell you at Google, we used a handout like that when making promotion and performance decisions. We'd have groups sit around talking about this stuff. They'd have a handout saying, here's the kind of biases we all have. And it created a language and changed behavior such that promotion rates equalized, and we didn't see gender differences in promotion rates after doing that. So a small intervention, as simple as a handout, and you pick what the topic is you want to work on, is enough to actually drive pretty substantial behavioral change. So to kind of go back to the beginning, there's a lot of things you can do. Hiring is a huge topic. How should you hire people? Really difficult to get that right, but it absolutely dictates the destiny of your organization. How you pay people. Most people don't have enough variation within their companies or organizations about how they pay. They think a 5 or 10% pay difference is a lot. It's not enough to keep your best people. But the biggest things I want you to take away is connect people to meaning in their work. And you do that by looking for people who have benefited from the work or who find meaning in telling those stories again and again, because we're storytelling animals. Look for opportunities to be generous. And that could be as simple as handing out a candy bar and telling somebody thank you. And nudge. Rather than doing like this colossal, massive, multi-year change process, look for a small intervention you can make, and ideally nudge not just the person, but the people around them. Those small interventions compound, and they have dramatic impact on human performance and retention and happiness and all the outcomes we care about, like innovation and inclusion and learning and skill development. And if you do any of this stuff, the last thing is number 10. It's an iterative process. Try it, learn from it, try again, learn from it, get better, and constantly improve. With that, I thank you for the time and the privilege of addressing you all today. Thank you very much.